Hey there, welcome to Uncertain Things. We're going to start a conversation with Caitlin Flanagan in a second. Just wanted to let you know that this is one of those few episodes that we actually decided to splice a bit of the conversation and leave it only for our beloved paying members on uncertain.substack.com. So if you're interested in more Vanessa, myself, and the inimitable, indomitable Caitlin Flanagan, go to our Substack and check it out. Here we go.
And our AI overlords can work wonders sometimes.
Okay, great.
So
well, let's interview them. Let's have them interview them.
It's coming. It's coming.
Okay, I can't wait.
Literally last night, Adam was playing for me. Like, he runs our audio through the AI, and then it doesn't know what to do in the pauses. And literally last night, it generated some creepy freaking robo message.
Yeah. The silences between the quiet parts that got somehow garbled into, or either garbled or used as fodder for some messages from the coming AI apocalypse. And it sounds like either a robot communicating in some futuristic language or somebody under possession. So it's either The Exorcist or is it The Exorcist meets Terminator? And then that going through another AI transcriber, the weird garbled devil parts were translated into, hey, let me in, pretty.
Whoa, whoa.
We are doomed.
Oh my God.
We are doomed.
We're just like these meat puppets, like at the end of evolution.
Yeah.
So going extinct. Can't handle asteroid.
Weirdly, this actually leads into my first question for you.
Okay, good.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Adam.
Hi, Caitlin. We have Caitlin Flanagan on.
Hi, guys. Good
Welcome
to be
back.
here. Thank
So
you.
glad to have you back. So I've heard you in a few recent interviews, I think on Bill Maher and other places, and I think even in your book of essays as well. I think you've mentioned a few times that you feel like we're on the verge of, or at least the West is on the verge of collapse, or we're on the path toward collapse. And you kind of, when you say it, you kind of say it a little flippantly or with humor.
I love it.
Like
fun.
Yes,
certainly. Like, how can you think otherwise?
And so, but I wanted to actually...
an apocalyptic event for the planet or species. But no, the West is probably post-apocalyptic right now, and we just are sweeping up the tinsel of it all.
Well, I wanted to ask you about it because I couldn't really quite tell if you were being facetious, if you meant it seriously.
No, I'm not being facetious.
So yeah, would you mind like just unpacking where do you see it? What are your telltale signs here?
Where to begin? I don't know if it's just one of those things where if you choose one small thing and you talk about it, then you sound like you're a lunatic,
right?
QAnon person, and you really fixated on like gender or the collapse of the church or something like this. But, well, to start with that, the church, obviously that's my cat and she's another sign of the apocalypse. I'm not kidding. When I was a kid, it was a big thing in America. Like 70% of Americans went to church services every week. But I came from an atheist intellectual family. And so I didn't really understand what, it just was like church, square, sounds boring. You see it on TV or movies and it kind of symbolizes certain things. But if you just think of all the things, let's just look at that one issue, American church attendance. All of the things that come with it. Aside from sexual abuse of children but let's just think of the other things that come with it. First place, people are in a social environment once a week. They're in a social environment. They're seeing people they see every week. And there's an idea of kind of communal awareness. Well, she doesn't look like she's doing well. or we should do this, or we have deacons who should visit that sick person and bring meals to her or to him. You had that going on. You had a sense of, there's a famous, I think it's Orwell, but maybe it's the ancients going through Orwell, that hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. Meaning, I might be doing the wrong thing. I might be doing something, and I am aware enough that it's the wrong thing, that it's hypocritical of me to do it. I'm aware there's a standard that's other and better than this. And so people always, you would say, well, is she going to church? She's a Harrod. And it's like, well, thank God she's going to church. She's at least hearing some notion larger than herself and some notion of a better abstract way to be. So you have that going on. And you have a sense, I would say, especially in the Catholic Church, which has this whole fully articulated cosmology, and that you are within a sort of very large picture of, you have a tiny part in it, but a very secure part in a large and carefully articulated system of belief and being. And I think that in all sorts of ways, the church was the best thing that kind of lined us up. And that as it has eroded so much, I am not at all surprised of the rise of QAnon, because humans, we have an obdurate illogical desire to believe in something.
As a person brought up in an atheist household, I mean, even if you can see the ramifications on like what American society, or what you're seeing in like the lack of social behavior, the lack of understanding a point of connection with your fellow man, a place in the universe. Like you said you were brought up in an atheist household, which increasingly more and more people are. Do you feel similarly that has left you bereft of some sort of like moral structure? Or are you kind of just more saying that like...
We're of the West. We were purely and entirely a household of the Western culture and the Western tradition. My father was a prominent historian and literary critic and writer, and my house was filled at all times with poetry and music and all of these things that refer to the greatest tradition ever, and in particular poetry. The reason I haven't had any published for like 6 months is because I'm writing about a particular poet that I grew up very close to in the family. And I ended up, against my parents' best efforts, for complicated reasons, they sent me to a Catholic school at a certain point, just assuming that I was smart enough not to believe these stupid things, that I get the writing and reading and whatever. And I was in 6th grade, and I was like, that sounds kind of good. And they had the Beatitudes up on the wall. And it was like 1971. So they were the Beatitudes are groovy, like, blessed be the poor, blessed be the meek, blessed be those who are out of favor. And those are kind of like right on ideals. Those are like Cesar Chavez. And then you had this whole thing where Cesar Chavez and then Bobby Kennedy, they worked together, and he ended the fast with Cesar in California. That Catholicism had this kind of moment, and it's a mystical thing. So I did have that, but much more than that. I had the poets, the writers, the art, and all of those things are clearly part of, of the West. And they're always in some way in conversation, to use that horrible way of what people use conversation now, with Western thought, including religion, even if they're pointing out that there is no such thing as a God or whatever. And
if I understand correctly, your issue or the thing that you're missing isn't the church in and of itself. It's I'm going to call it in homage to Harold Bloom, the canonicality of the West. Which, no?
I see your reference, and I'm going to say, and not to top Harold Bloom with Thomas Jefferson, or certainly with C.S. Lewis, but Jefferson, he put together that whole Bible that was the Christian Bible without the miracles. You can buy it. And
the scissored out Bible.
Yes, exactly. When he wasn't being like a horrible slaver. And, the idea is that the Christ himself was the best possible exemplar of how a human should be and what to do. And if you take
By the way, I would argue that he was not, that was not canonicality in a sense, because by cutting out those parts, you are taking out some of the sources of references, you're rewriting that history. The history might mean evolve, or what I would say Western history or any kind of traditional hermeneutical history might mean evolving past certain aspects of the belief, but still being referential to them, right? Still acknowledging them. So cutting them out entirely for pedagogical reasons misses the point. So I would say that is almost anti-canonical.
Well, you are definitely in the realm of C.S. Lewis, who comes along and says, there's no point in all of this if there's not religious faith, if Christ isn't the child of the actual God. This idea that take away my code and give it to somebody else is terrible advice. Turn against my family if they don't share this is terrible advice. This is no way to be. The sparrow, that God will provide tomorrow and he'll provide the next day and have no concern for these things. These are all sort of absolutely terrible bits of advice if they're not part of belief, where this is, okay, these are things that will be recognized by God, that will be recognized perhaps in heaven, that the whole point of it, if you were going to give somebody a manual of behavior, you would say, okay, you need to save the Old Testament is good on this. A lot of wisdom literature is in there, as they say, you need to save and set aside. And Christ is like, spend it all now and on the poor. Everything you have, give it all away and endlessly. Because this is my kingdom that you're heading to. And this is how we are to be. And we're certainly challenged by that all the time when we see, we learn to drive past homeless encampments. And we're like, well, why am I not giving them everything that I have instead of scolding my horrible politicians? So that idea of separating the two, and that's where we get this idea that, we don't need church. We don't need religion. We'll have this social function. We'll have the bowling league, in the 50s or whatever. They were very church society then. We'll have these things that will fulfill it.
Right.
The argument would be, from a belief standpoint, no, that's all silly. These are things that come along with belief, but it's what binds us together so powerfully.
I think where I find it much more easy to see the separation, and I think to some extent you can argue that the Enlightenment scholars, especially the revolutionary generation, and not just Thomas Jefferson generally, had that instinctively, but I think it comes even more easily to Jews, where the belief itself and in a sense of the belief in the exact truth of the theology and the cosmology implied and what it tells you about the age of the earth or the evolution of species really doesn't matter. But beyond that, what's in your heart or on your mind does not matter. And everything that matters is the practice. And part of the practice is the study. Part of the practice is the absorption of the texts and the textual literary tradition. And in so doing, absorbing the values, the morals, and the community that is formed around those texts for generations. And you do all that without necessarily attributing to your actions godly reward down the line. You are not promised a heaven. You're not promised paradise. In fact, if anything, Jewish tradition tells you quite sharply, you are owed nothing. Even the idea, this is, one of the oldest tropes around Jews of the chosenness of the people. The chosenness of the people is a chosenness to duty, not to rights, not to privileges. There's more expected of you, not because you get anything for it, but because you've been selected to do the hard work. And if people want to follow and join you, they're welcome, but you are responsible for fulfilling those acts. And
yet there's a great sacredness that I sense as a Catholic when I go to an event, a great sacredness and a great turning always to God for blessings. So it's very different to me than just merely, or only, I should say, a tradition with a people, But
I would argue that if you imbibe a set of textual, spiritual, philosophical beliefs, and it sometimes like almost literally in your DNA, it becomes the poetic version of epigenetics. The idea of God is inherent in your language. It's inherent in how you think about things. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's in your understanding of truly how the mechanism of the world works, that this is the primary mover that pushes one billiard ball to clash against the next. But you have that understanding as the fundamental of your moral view, and then you can wrestle and debate how you actually position yourself against it or within it. And for a lot of Jews, this is the answer has been very easily, I don't believe in any of that in the sense of the material world and the causality of nature. It doesn't at all infringe on my understanding of physics or biology. And that's why I'm comfortable being a scientist. I'm comfortable dealing with modernity and not having to relitigate this constant battle between faith and modernity, because there is no clash for them.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the conflict that you're describing in yourself is almost inherently Catholic, because for Catholicism, there is much more emphasis on the transcendentalism of the text and the opaqueness of it. If anything, Protestantism wanted to bring it down to earth, make it is the populism version of Christianity. Right. And Catholicism is more similar to Judaism in the sense that unpenetrability of it is part of it. And like that's why there's a lot more. In
Catholicism, they would say the mysteries.
The mysteries.
They have a religion that encompasses the mysteries, and we won't know.
Right.
But I just wanted, as an aside, ask about Judaism. I know there's many ways of practicing Judaism, but in general, if one could say this, are the events of the Old Testament understood to be metaphoric?
I think that, first of all, this is exactly why you get the cliche of two Jews, four opinions, right?
Right.
The system itself does not require you to have a defined opinion about this. Some sects, I think, would, but even among them, the argument is often alive. It's like, was Adam a metaphor? Is Adam an actual first man? Or can you try to apply that to our modern understanding of biology? Every person will approach it differently. The thing that's required of you, by the way, isn't just to have your opinion and be fine with it, but if you are going to bring your opinion to bear in a community discussion, is to back it up. Show with rigor how you come up with this opinion, or how, if you have an opinion that is interpretive and contradicts longer traditions, why yours should be taken seriously. And if you can make the case, you'll be respected for it.
Well, again, this is the collapse of the modern university system. The idea that, no, don't bring me your quote unquote evidence of something I don't want to hear, or something that challenges me. I know what's right. I don't want complexity. I don't want to have 2 or 3 different people with different opinions bringing logic, evidence, reason to explain an argument. And that, too, is one of the great losses that we are experiencing now, suicide of Europe and all that, when you see in London these vast marches that are, well, first place, they're kind of against the nation of Israel, but they're really against Jews, is what they're really about. We can't have that, in the West. But when you see that and the rise of affinity toward what it is that these people seem to be expressing, you're seeing a movement away from, even if you're in the world of religious belief, you're moving away from religious beliefs that are perforce aligned with in other words, I hate the project, but the project of the West, and are perforce. And the project of the West partly had to do with you could have your cultural identity as an Irish Catholic or whatever, but nobody's really, we're not going to have the Spanish Inquisition at this moment or Savonarola. You just, you kind of create the God that you want to have. But that is, in its most extreme form, a religion that, when practiced on a fundamentalist level, which we're not supposed to discuss according to Kamala Harris, but it is against so many of the things the West stands for, the rights of the individual, which then from there goes to the rights of women, the rights of gay people, the rights of the poor, the rights, all of those the individuals have rights, and letting go of all that to a culture that, doesn't believe that.
Right. The logic of human rights, of liberalism, as we discussed from the inception of this podcast, is tethered to this now anathematized idea of Western tradition, to the extent that it means anything.
It's not anathematized to me.
No,
Western
of course.
tradition, I know, but the whole point that our very undereducated populace, which we've always been an undereducated, that's our thing, That's our thing, is we're, these old Huckfin, they don't need, all that book learning. They're going to light out for the territory if they see a wrong in slavery, etc.
But I would argue that all of this is the result of, which is what I going back to what I was trying to get at with the canons, that the problem is in part the abandonment of literary and, you could argue, liturgical tradition. And I mean liturgical not just in the Christian church going sense. I mean reading the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence as a source for moral justification for the existence of the United States and for the value of the modern liberal order is a form of liturgy, in my mind. And the fact that now those
natural rights are a form of liturgy.
And I think that entire set of logic that comes from having a tradition that is amassed over a textual conversation of hundreds and hundreds of years, that has a religious component, but also has as a social, historical, cultural component to it, that has led to something that we all value, and a lot of the people who now rage against it benefit from without realizing it. To lose touch with that tradition means to not appreciate how unique, weird, and rare it is, and think that we can just start over or imagine our whole new canon, because that canon has only led us to the bad things.
Right.
I'm thinking too, so just for backstory for you, Caitlin, part of the reason why we started, or one of the central questions that's animated us to start this podcast, was that Adam was seeing the signs of liberalism beginning to fade. And I, educated in America, for lack of a better word.
Where were you educated, Adam?
Oh, me? Israel.
So I educated in America, but with parents who were very, I would say, artistically intellectual, like very into literature and poetry, but not so much into the kind of philosophy or like kind of more political documents. And theoretically, that would have come in my education system. But I had a central question about what's this big deal about liberalism? Like when we started this podcast, I just didn't understand what was at risk, in part because I didn't have the kind of like context nor historical deep dive that one would need to understand what is unique and unusual about this country.
Right, and that's where you get phenomena like this guy, Adam Rubin. I guess he was kind of like a second-rate stand-up, and then somebody told him about the Enlightenment, and then he made like a 3-minute cartoon. I saw it. I literally thought, oh, this is like Schoolhouse Rock. This must be for second graders, you know? And then I realized, oh my God, this is for adults. And they need this. They don't know this. Even this guy, Rubin, what's his first name? Did I say it correctly? You know who I mean? He's a big right-wing podcaster.
Oh, Dave Rubin?
Yes, that's who I meant. Yes. Elemental isn't even the right word. This kind of cartoon about the Enlightenment for 3 minutes is more about the Enlightenment than millions of people knew before they watched the 3-minute long cartoon. You know, we are so deeply uneducated, and it was definitely going to bite us in the rear end at some point.
Yeah,
and it has now bitten us.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back to what I'm thinking back to what you were saying in terms of like and I don't want to. I'm very grateful to my parents. I think they did a very good job. But
yeah.
but I mean,
they raised her with the arts, and she's a lovely person. And look what she's achieved.
And I'm more educated than your average American. I will still contend.
Yes. I wouldn't believe so. Yes.
But you were saying with your father and like your household, it was not just like literature and poetry and art, but there was like a sense of like inculcation of certain values that you would define as kind of Western values. And I'm just wondering, like, because that also seems in part what's faltering, because like it's not just the absence of religion as a moral framework, but it's like an absence of a understanding across people in different parts of this country about what are the values that we as Americans supposedly hold dear.
That we, it's like the gold, the fish in water and doesn't know any other,
right,
reality.
Exactly.
We're like, well, duh, of course you can marry the person you want, or you can rail against the politicians, or so long as you don't get caught doing it, you can spray paint some monuments. You can certainly burn a flag.
I mean, just imagine the historical ignorance of underlying the conversation in America about slavery that imagines or talks about slavery in the U.S., European history, European slavery of Africans. One of the darkest periods in Western history, period. But to imagine that slavery is so uniquely Western, where you still have real ongoing slavery in the world today.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, arguably, a lot of our technological benefits come from still active slavery in parts of the world, but even more literal, classically imagined types of slavery with whips and warlords and sex slaves still ongoing in many parts of the world, affecting the lives of millions of people. But to imagine that the violence committed by European colonists is so unique and out of touch with humanity that still fighting that fight, instead of celebrating the fact that this was a fight that has actually been won, and that it was Western tradition that has been able to fight against itself and rip that cancer from itself.
A lot of the founders knew it was wrong. They had a fight about it. There was a paragraph in the Declaration of Independence that got taken out, was Jefferson saying we can't have slavery because of, blah, blah, blah. I don't think could have ended any other way than we, America, have ended, because you can't reconcile them. And I grew up in Berkeley, and it was the first school system to integrate without a court order. And starting in 4th grade, there was a very rigorous Black history program. It was partly written by some members of the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party was very much like there was a Black Panther breakfast, catty-corner to the 4th through 6th grade that I went to. Anyways, Black history started 4th grade, and I was assigned to one of the classes, and I went there, and there were 2 teachers, African American, and it was the first day, and they were just kind of getting everybody up to speed. And a teacher said angrily, George Washington had slaves. And I thought, a teacher has lied. Well, I can't believe teachers could lie to students. And I'm like, is someone going to say anything? And I'm looking around. Nobody's raising their hand. And I'm like, I cannot effing believe that this teacher, it was like she had said 2 times 2 is 107. And I got on the bus and go back up to the hills. And, my dad is home. He got tenure. He's home working. And I'm like, hey, Dad, as if to tell him, get a load of this, Did George Washington have slaves? And he looks at me kind of like, God, she's an idiot. And he's like, I'm like 10. And he's like, yes, he did. And so did Thomas Jefferson and so on. And I just looked at him and I'm like, what? And I just said this look in his eye where it's like, how do you possibly explain to a 10-year-old? You can't take a 10-year-old through all of this history. And you can't tell it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that I really started studying anything having to do with the founders and the Constitution and all that, because it's a story that's never, ever, ever going to be made right. It's a story that's ended us, I think. But
this is amazing that you're saying this, because I'm currently, it's funny. Everything that you're saying keeps making me think of other things. I'm keep looking for books and references that I want to bring up to you. But now you've literally touched the text that my boss Jonah shares every 4th of July, which I think is one of the most moving paragraphs that exist in the American canon, and it's a commentary by Calvin Coolidge.
Oh, well, people, okay, I'm ready to be floored by some Calvin Coolidge. This will be a first.
Not known for his theory oratory.
Yeah,
and yet goes back to the point about the importance of existing within the tradition and reflecting on how sometimes it is the internal contradictions set by the tradition that end up being more important. But in order to enjoy the benefits of those contradictions, like the Civil
benefits
War,
of hypocrisy. Yeah, exactly.
You need to acknowledge what were the tensions that caused it in the first place. So he writes, about the Declaration, there is a finality that is exceedingly restful. It is often asserted that the world has made a great deal of progress since 1776, that we have had new thoughts and new experiences which have given us a great advance over the people of that day, and that we may therefore very well discard their conclusions for something more modern. But that reasoning cannot be applied to this great charter. If all men are created equal, that is final. If they are endowed with inalienable rights, that is final. If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth or their soundness, the only direction in which he can proceed historically is not forward but backward, toward the time when there was no equality, no rights of the individual, no rule of the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary. Their ideas are not more modern, but more ancient than those of the revolutionary fathers. It's heartbreaking. And it did make me think, because you were talking about the way this is playing out in the war, or the protest wars in the streets as regards the war in Gaza, right? The proxy wars in the streets of Western cities. I've seen you recently wearing our little star as I assume as a sign of solidarity. But I was wondering what made you feel the need to put it on.
I told someone, I was like, I put it on I was like, I'm gonna wear this till this is settled, and I'm like, I guess I'm Jewish now. I guess I've been wearing it for like 9 months. when I was a girl, every girl read The Diary of Anne Frank. And I was very moved by it. It's a very moving book. And she included in it, and it's amazing to me that it's actually kind of a myth about the King of Denmark, that he had everyone in Denmark, including the king, Christians, had all worn the necessary Star of David on their clothes so that Nazis couldn't pick out the Jews among them. And it turns out that Denmark was extremely good during the Holocaust and got a lot of people out. And the king deserves this place in history. But that thing about the Star of David wasn't true. But Anne Frank had even heard about it in The Secret Annex. So it was this powerful story that penetrated. And as soon as I read it, I was like, I'll do that. If this ever comes back, how could I possibly imagine it? I'm a boomer. I was born in 1961, which is now seen rightly as this kind of golden era of Jews in America and maybe in the world. And I grew up in Berkeley. I mean, all my friends, most of them were Jewish because they a lot of academics and they're in the Berkeley Hills, Litwack, Zimmerman. I didn't think of it that way, that this was a Jewish or a non-Jewish family, but I just, and I just said, that's what I'll do if this happens. And I knew, and, just reading beyond that, I knew all the things to look for that it might be starting. And starting around 5 years ago, I was like, wait, everybody wake up. There was a pro-Palestinian parade on La Cienega Boulevard in LA, the middle of LA, it goes up to Beverly Hills. And one of the trucks pulled over, the men got out, walked into a sushi restaurant and said, "Who is Jewish? Stand up." And it ended up that there was a scuffle that ended up in front of the restaurant. And those men got back in the truck and they did go to court and they were found guilty of some minor thing. But I was saying, that's the thing. Like, that thing never just happens once. That's the thing. It's here. And then I just have felt like, because of my age, like I'm in a horror. I'm a Christian, so if you're Jewish, it's a horror movie of like 3D dimensions. But I just feel like this woman going around going, it's here. And when I read, and as soon as this happened, I thought, I'm going to get a Star of David, but October 7th. And then I thought, oh, that's performative and showy, and I'm sure everyone will be doing that to show they're a good person. No one was doing it. And then I said, no, I need to do this. And I just, went to Amazon. I ended up, I have still to this day, I have some in my purse, because sometimes people will say, other shicks and devils. Well, that's really impressive. And I'm like, really? I have some more. Would you like one? And never want one. But I just felt like I know what to do. And I know where to be. And I just thought, even though I'm old and I don't think I'll be really good on the front lines, I'll be taken down immediately. I just feel like young people, I want them to see, if they're just in a coffee shop in LA or just in a bookshop or library, which is the only place I ever go. But a lot of Jews go to bookshops and libraries. So I feel like I am in contact with young Jewish people at the places that I go. They'll see this mom-shaped figure, and they'll be like, she's with us, and I'll die in the middle of it if someone starts putting any shit on these kids. And then to see that the University of California, I was raised in Berkeley. My father was a tenured professor. To see what's happening there, I am just stunned. And
I think you said in your speech at AEI, you think you mentioned that, like, if your dad had seen anyone harassing a Jewish student when he was at a university, he would have been the first one to be like breaking up the situation,
Oh yeah. And my father, he didn't know how to drive a car. He was an ass-feed, but he did in the Second World War, he was a freshman in college when Pearl Harbor was bombed. And like every other man in college, he walked into town the next day and enlisted. But if someone had come to his office in Wheeler Hall and said, "Hey, Tom, there's some skinheads, they're roughing up Jewish kids," my dad would have been out of that building in a second. He would not he would not have thought twice about that. I just thought, growing up when I did, I thought, oh, anti-Semitism was this terrible thing that rose in Europe in the 30s and that brought this terrible man to power and that ultimately led to the Holocaust, and that the forces of good had won and that thing wouldn't come back again. And this whole thing has led me to understand, really to understand. Like, it's the ancient hatred. It reappears and whatever. But in America? Or should I say in this landmass that was America? It's over. That's it. It's over. It's over. That's it. And that it's rotted through to the universities that are so beholden to Jewish intellectuals and the Jewish intellectual tradition, argument and free speech and, talking into the night, and our, complexity that now is just a shoot at the university. Everything going on in Israel is simple. This. No, it's not. Where did you go to school that's what you were taught? You think you went to the school of right and wrong, but you're not understanding on any kind of level what's going on here and what this is a part of. And sorry, that's just why I wanted to start David for so long.
No, could go on as long as you want. This is your show.
Your show. Go ahead.
No, because just what you were saying about and in the universities, in trying to evaluate, Vanessa and I were having a discussion about, let's call it risk assessment in times of cataclysms. And
right.
And I think this is something that we generally try to do on uncertain things. We started this podcast from this sense of institutional collapse, of broad institutional collapse, trying to think through, okay, so what's salvageable, what's changing, or where are we going with this? And our desire was to get to the now what questions, or at least to evaluate what's really happening. And when it comes to the risk of specifically the question of Jewishness, so I think when it comes to the broad question of the values of the West being, and without abusing the word West, because it can be coded to people as the ugly chauvinism and pathway MAGA. But
don't defer to these morons.
I'm not saying words in the same way that I want to reclaim liberalism to mean what it really means, and not just lazy progressivism. But the word West, I have no attachment to it. It's very Cold War-y, and it also, when we talked to Neil Ferguson, he made a good point. When you're thinking about who upholds the liberal world order now, a lot of it is an alliance with the South Pacific Sea, right? So and also Israel, which is also not historically the West. I do care about liberalism, and to the extent that liberalism is coded in Judeo-Christian tradition, I want to acknowledge both the Jewish and the Christian parts of it, because I think they are inherent to it. But where the threat to Jews specifically is actually most material is in areas like the academy right now. And it's not shocking that it's in the academy, because this is actually the ground zero for a lot of the anti-Westernism, anti-liberalism voices, at least coming from the left. And you were mentioning going into libraries to boast your little.
Well, I'm just normally I'm just saying, like, the places that I go tend to be places like libraries and bookshops. So I think if there's young people there, they can see this momish figure. I'm not in search of the Jews.
You know where to find us. I am actually not welcome anymore in many bookshops in New York, because many of them have actual signs saying no Zionists allowed, right? So you might not be able to find your audience in bookstores in New York, at least.
Right. That's why it's over.
the other thing that I wanted to read to you, and I promise that's all I'm going to quote for today.
I love reading to me. It's like, do I have to pay for this? It's great. Carry on.
The loss of the role of the church in society, and I was trying to recontextualize it as the loss of commitment to a Western canon. But I think part of the reason that we are losing these institutions is, or at least makes me think of what Jacques Berzun in his wonderful book From Dawn to Decadence described as decadence. And he writes it early on to describe the sentiment that led to the Reformation. He writes, blah, 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 normal corruptions, indulgences, we all know about that stuff. But then he makes the point that, but moral turpitude, just the common moral turpitude, what we know, commonplace corruption, concealed a deeper trouble. The meaning of the roles had been lost. The priest, instead of being a teacher, was ignorant. The monk, instead of helping to save the world by his piety, was an idle profiteer. The bishop, instead of supervising the care of the souls in his diocese, was a politician and businessman. Too often, the bishop was a boy of 12, his influential family having provided early for his blah, 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 blah. The system was rotten. This had been said over and over, yet the old Hulk was immovable. When people accept futility and the absurd as normal, the culture is decadent. And that, I remember the first time I read it, it immediately made me think about higher education, the American higher education, especially in the humanities and the social sciences.
Can you say again, the absurd is, can you read the last sentence again? That was so good about the absurd.
Futility and the absurd.
When people accept futility and the absurd as normal, the culture is decadent.
That's really good.
Caitlin's going to find a pen so she can write it down.
By the way, he added with his wry humor, the term is not a slur. It is a technical label.
It reminds me, Caitlin, in your introduction to your On Thinking for Yourself book, you quote Orwell, and he has a somewhat similar quote, which is, to see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle. And I know it's not exactly the same, but there's something about this attentiveness to absurdity and this feeling of futility that feels quite of a piece to what Orwell's also pointing out. And feels relevant.
Absurd. Barzan was one of my father's mentors. And my father was at Columbia in the 50s getting his PhD on the GI Bill. And Lionel Trilling directed his dissertation. But my father had much greater feeling for Barzan. And Barzan was like, my dad wrote novels, dense historical novels. And Barzan was like 90. Living in Texas, and he would write my father. It was so sweet. Like, my dad was an old man. It was like this older man. This is very good. You've done this. You've done that.
That's so lovely.
There were just people who strode the world of these universities, and
I see why you write about it, actually. Because you held it in very high esteem, clearly. Like, you saw it as an actual, citadel of thinking, moral fabric. And now it kind of makes sense that it's one of your beats or obsessions. It's because you see how far it's fallen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think this is, for me, too. I was lucky to also grow up in a place that is still, for the most part, uninfected by the American decadence of universities. So I know what a good professor is like, what a good, I hate the word mentor, but there's my one professor that I would probably attach that label to, Sluchowski. We had him on the podcast, and he, along with a fleet of amazing thinkers, made me rediscover how much I love universities. I had an idea of what this ivory tower would be like before coming in, which was shattered on my first day. And I was like, oh, is this it? And then by the merit of the professors there, I rediscovered it. And I was like, oh, this is actually better than the fantasy.
Mm-hmm. There's just something about, certainly with seminars, to sit a group of young people around a table to ask a question, that's the question of this hour and a half. And to have students, they rush into the fore, they know the answer, and then they ask another question that kind of questions their assumption. And these young people not being allowed to jump back to, I don't feel safe with this idea, It's like, no, let's press it. And the professor's like, I'm not going to obviously, it's not purely just questions, but the idea that young people running to the fore with their certainty, or to think that this is an easily answered question, and then more wisdom, more knowledge is put on the table.
And also more personal desire to play that game.
Yes.
As set, if the example is set effectively by the professor, a good professor trying to establish the game of seminar, open, pugilistic discourse and inquiry would poke holes in every perspective, whether they personally believe in it or not. And one of the moments I realized how much I appreciate my Professor Sluchowski was we would constantly have back and forth arguments about everything. Sluchowski and I would always have that shred of irony that we would recognize in each other, because we knew that each of us could flip our own perspective on a dime if the other person took the other side.
Yes.
Because the whole point is to be good enough and refined enough to get to the heart of what is actually at stake. And when you do that, you actually find value in a richer world, and you're not defaulting to the lazy, childish assumptions that you come in with. At the end, you might come back more secured in your original positions, but now you understand them in a deeper more meaningful context. You can defend them more effectively, and you also have a lot more intellectual compassion to understand how people might reach other conclusions.
Right. And you see, this is good in society as well as in intellectual development, because then the young person comes out and has been modeled to that young person, pose a question before you attack. Ask this person, let this person defend, probably you'll be in the right and they'll realize they don't have a leg to stand on, but let this person come forward and say something. And then, that'll kind of, you can tell when a real scholar is kind of pulling a young person out, because they're letting them spew more and more and more of their idea. And as I say, in that essay you're referring to, my father, when I was certain about something and I was like, a teen or in my 20s or 30s, I didn't know that much beyond that. They passed away, but he'd let me just spin and spin and spin why I was so right about something. And I start to think, well, the very fact that he's not even interrupting says he doesn't have anything. Obviously, he's impressed. And then there would always be, and I always was taken by surprise. I go, And Kate, what is the best argument of the other side? Oh, said he didn't. And what is the best argument of the other side? And if you don't have that baked into your thinking, if you don't really know what your thought is up against, it's not up against these little mere things. Yeah. It's not up against their worst thing. It's against their top thing. Then you haven't even begun to think about it.
I read that anecdote and I was curious about how it was just kind of illustrative about the way he brought you up more generally, but B, curious about if you brought that into your own parenting style yourself. Is that a technique that you employed when you were bringing up your boys?
My father was just a great scholar and teacher of the old school. That was just in him. I don't think he ever thought like, I need a parenting technique, It was just, we were growing up and we were in the house. So, I do ask a lot of questions. But I also, when they were little, I would sort of say, no, they'd come home with something. And I didn't have time to Socratic it out. I'd be like, no, that's not right. this and this and this and this happened. And so what you're telling me is that what someone told you, that's not right. And I just felt like as a mother, I had the right to do it. And to hear, the best I could give my kids as not being a scholar, not being a great, I was a high school teacher, I mean, that says it all. Not having, my father was one of these guys, like your professor, like he knew so much. You knew that when you entered in there, like, boy, I don't know what the gun analogy is, all the cylinders or whatever, or like he had an atom bomb back there if he needed it. You weren't going to be, and I just said, as a mother, what I can do is give my kids what I do know. And as they're out in the field and somebody's saying these stupid things, I can say, no, this and this and this and this.
And your boys were Gen Z? Is that?
Yeah, they were born in 1998.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious about what were the kinds of messages that they were receiving in school or in culture that they were...
Much more it was in college.
Oh, interesting.
Much more it was in college. But one was a philosophy major at Kenyon College. It was a great education. Then my other son went to NYU, and I don't even know if it was in the classes so much, but he was a sponge for all the ideas of the now. And then another thing about my father, like if I had some like goofy idea set, like he wasn't drilling it out at me. He was like, oh, she's going to grow, like. For years, I just thought, I don't like Jane Austen. She's a tight ass. And he would just laugh that I was calling Jane Austen a tight. He would never rally to her defense. But then you get older, like, oh, she's pretty good. But that son, really, as he got older, now they're 26, he kind of realized the folly of all that and where the humor of it exists.
But that's not obvious, right? You need
that's what I was
an environment to grow into to allow you to start looking back with some discomfort at your childishness, right? Your
right.
more less developed ideas. So what were the environments that allowed them to grow out of it?
He's a smart kid is one thing. He's a smart kid. And he started getting some friends who really were very intelligent, I think, and who were deigning to ask questions themselves of these things. And he was impressed by that. And he came from a household that, if someone says at the dinner table some like really stupid idea that they've gleaned somewhere, we're not going to be like, oh, that's really exciting. You've learned this. Tell me more. We're like, no, that's totally wrong. And
maybe the question should be asked in reverse. How did he manage to avoid the social pressures that cause so many young people to feel, and also not young people, entire institutions, corporations, feel that we need to conform and nod along and pretend that Ibram X. Kendi is a good writer?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't think he's going around. I mean, he would say he's a lefty, but I don't know if...
What he means by lefty is what an average poll of Americans would understand.
But it's also like, to use one of his words and a word of your generation, I think it's kind of an aesthetic choice. As much as
That's funny.
is.
I feel like in our last conversation, Adam used this word, and you're like, "Explain, Adam. What do you mean by
did
aesthetic?"
Okay, yes. No, Adam, you got me going. Because he always uses that word, and I'm sure he's someone else entirely when he's not with his mother. Who's gonna like to let it all hang out with your mom?
I don't know. I think I was lucky enough that with my mom, I didn't have the Jane Austen problem. Was it Jane Austen?
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't have that because weirdly, maybe epigenetically, I went almost through the same intellectual development as my mom to a creepy degree. I discovered Goethe. I fall in love with Goethe when I'm 13, and I'm asking you, have you ever read Goethe's Faust?
Right.
She literally just like pulls a letter from when she was 13, writing to her father about Faust. And
wow.
And it's like there are some weird traces of encoded cultural curiosities and interests. So we didn't have a lot of that. We did have some arguments about about the pandemic, but for the most part, we do share that intellectual structure. So I know that there's a lot of the embedded personality of your parents and where you come from that can define how you respond to cultural trends and how much you are either absorbent or resistant to them. But to the extent that we think that it's not, if it's over, as you said, I think that's the title of the episode, right? It's over. But if it's not over, or if there is a way for it to not be over, it means that we get our institutions, to use this overwrought term, out of the decadence, or have alternatives. But if the problem is that the priest who's supposed to be a teacher is an ignoramus, that the professor who's supposed to cultivate discussion, questioning, and inquiry tells them that here's the program and you need to stick to it. If the literary critic tells you that Robin DiAngelo is the height of cultural analysis, then the problem can't just rely on the individuals who have the wherewithal to push back against the absurdity.
Right.
The problem is for the people who do have that wherewithal to figure out what do we do to get more people along, to get more people to argue with each other without the animus, to get more people to rediscover the joy of being uncomfortable in your beliefs, and then creating an entire institution that aspires you to do that, to find the points of uncertainty, study them, and learn from them, which is on some level what the liberal sciences are all about.
Mm-hmm. And that to reinvest in the notion that to be a teacher, K through 12, yes, definitely a college professor, it's a sacred responsibility. Like, who are you?
Bring back your Catholicism.
Yes, we're just, some way that's not ecumenical, not religious. This is a responsibility. These young people are coming through your classroom, and who are you to tell them anything about the way things are? You are going to teach them some political fashion that you have to understand, and they're going to think, oh, that's the wise person, that's the instructor, that's what I'm going to believe too. It's just beyond a dereliction of duty. It's really ugly. A final anecdote, because I know you've given me so much time. I don't know. Let's bring things down from the celestial sphere down to Ballerina Farm. If you know what this is, she's an influencer. She's a Mormon woman. She has a ton of kids. She's extremely beautiful. She's on TikTok. Very, very popular. And there was a big article in the UK Times of kind of a nasty reporter went and was just saying how this woman is so oppressed and her husband has forced her to do all these things. She's making like millions of dollars, but and how awful this is. And she had trained at Juilliard, and she'd been planning to be a ballerina, and instead they went and started this farm, and he forced her to do this. But anyways, I'd never heard of her. She's very pop, so I just give a little time to TikTok. And I got the way you do, you get so absorbed into these people, and they have 8 or 9 children, and they do have and they homeschool the children. The teacher comes and does the homeschooling. And sometimes she does those Q&As. People can send in questions. And somebody, obviously another homeschooling person, had said, what curriculum do you use? Because I gather there's a lot of different curricula that are out there for parents to buy and to use. And she said, well, we've really used and we really like the good and the beautiful. And I was like, whoa, the good and the beautiful, like this Platonic notion. And I looked it up, and it was a very religious curriculum. I mean, it's certainly for elementary school, you're getting all the basics, but it's also through infused with Mormonism and Mormon ideas. But I just thought, wait a minute. What if there was a school? Can you imagine there being a school? They go to the school, like, what is the mission of the school? Oh, we're educating children in the good and the beautiful. And the first question would be, and it's the right question, well, what is the good? And before that could even be discussed, we'd be like, who are you to say what the good is? There is no such thing as the good. There is no such thing as the beautiful. There is no way to discern an work of art as being of higher achievement or quality or aesthetic value than another. Everything is equal. There's nothing is good. Nothing is beautiful, but everything is good. Everything is beautiful. A thin woman is not beautiful, but a fat woman is beautiful because everything is beautiful. So maybe it's a thin woman. She gets kind of like allowed to be beautiful in the sense that no one should question her eating habits, and everything is like, it's beyond Panglossian. It's just like everything is good unless it's really, really fucking bad. But then all these women who are like attacking Ballerina Mom, I'm like, wait a minute, like she has, no matter what you think about her attitude, she has 8 children, possibly 9. If you're going to tell me there's no inherent worth in the raising of children, and it is quite appealing how they're all kind of, they're a little bit running around in the background. They're, they're kind of free in a way, these kids. And she's kind of unworried about them. Like, I spent the whole time thinking, like, oh my God, they're going to fall in the irrigation ditch in the farm. Yeah. But I still want to write her a letter. I don't think that a 3-year-old should be up at this stove, honestly, like cooking up something of her own volition with a spoon on high. But I just thought, could it be so wrong? Is Mormonism any different than any other religion? It's just more recent, so it seems more funny, or more plausible or visible. But in this effed up world, could there be anything better that you could give a child than, number one, teaching him how to grow some food? We're at that point in America. So it's like, instead of the genderless walrus, what if we show him, like, let's put this seed in here. You grow it up. We're going to get some seed that's going to grow it, and you get the carrots. You eat the carrots because we're in an apocalypse and nobody's bringing us food. You eat the carrots.
I just wanted your thoughts on, like, to tying 2 threads together, because, like, you were talking about sacredness earlier, and that made me think that the only tool that I think is available now intellectually to our elite, pseudo-educated new generation of leaders, but also potentially more broadly in society, is the tool of deconstruction. And when you don't have an established sense of sacredness, which I could apply to what I read from Coolidge about the Declaration, or about faith, or about the family and child rearing, and also the only tool that you have is deconstruction, then you keep undermining and letting society literally atomize, because you don't know how to put anything together. And that's why I think when you see all these collectives that are trying to remake the social contract as anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-Jew, anti-whatever, and try to build those communities from scratch, they always end up devolving into the same farce of self-undermining and internal warfare, because they don't have the tool of truly drawing a line of, this is where the base is. This is what's important. This is what's sacred. I think that the canon that I keep coming back to is part of what, to me, is close to sacred in Western, liberal, whatever society, is that it's that history of literary, cultural, social thinking that you can argue starts with the Old Testament. You can argue it starts with Greece and Athens and the Roman Republic. You can argue it starts in Sumeria or China or wherever, but it has a tradition of human thought and real hermeneutical process that is of value. And I need to draw this line and take that axiomatically seriously to be able to build from it.
Mm-hmm. It's obviously for another 1,000 episodes, but, in the late 80s when, let's just say critical theory or French critical theory was starting to become so ascendant in just the humanities in those days, anybody who said, this is kind of specious way to look at, say, a 19th century text or so, anybody who said, well, I'm concerned about that, and it's going to different departments, you would just be considered to be such an old, you're a hysteric, afraid of new ideas. And it was mostly because nobody knew it was going to get that deeply into the groundwater of all kinds of departments, and that people studying all sorts of things and not even understanding their connection to critical theory and deconstruction started to have this way of thinking, or as I think of it as unthinking, everything, history, and even now we see science to a large extent. I think it's directly connected to Israel because of what's happening. Because Edward Said, whom I knew growing up, who's a friend of my parents, a brilliant man. You couldn't not like Edward Said. You couldn't. He was just a person of just tremendous grace in all senses. When he wrote Orientalism, I remember, how old are you, Caitlin? I remember him driving out with the family to my parents' out on Long Island house in 1978 with the first edition of, this is my book.
Orientalism. Where on Long Island?
It was kind of near Port Jefferson. Are you from Long Island?
Huntington gal.
Huntington. Okay. Yes, I remember chasing a lot of trains at Huntington.
Yeah.
But Edward, a beautiful writer, whatever, he knew Foucault, of course, and was deeply influenced by Foucault in writing that book. And the power of that book, of Edward's force of personal experience, of thinking, Foucault's rise in the university, and all of a sudden, you look at all those things about the most cited books in dissertations in the humanities, Foucault is usually at the top, and Edward is not far beneath. And so those ideas, which became very dangerous ideas, you wouldn't have a Jewish student being kept out of the UCLA library if those ideas hadn't gotten into the groundwater the way they did. Those ideas have turned into a poison that runs through. And people say, people used to say, like 10 years ago, if you were writing about these things on College Life, they'd be like, they're hysterical about college. Right. It's like, no, college is serious. College is how we educate the young. If something's going on systemically at colleges, of course it's important, or else the whole thing is just a folly if it's not going to have any lasting effects.
And that they're disingenuous, by the way, when they say that, well, who cares about college? Because whenever a DeSantis tries to pass a law about colleges, they go apeshit.
Right.
So, of course you care about education.
Right. And the sad thing now is that the people who are trying to rescue colleges are as wrong-headed as the people who have caused the problems. You can't have the state intervening that there be this many professors of this idea and it's that idea, because the whole notion is that we've gotten the scholars together in a particular field, and they have studied the field, and they know what a curriculum should be. And the stupid old government can't come in and say, no, you have to have, this other opposing position.
And then again, the scholars, as we've established, are decadent, and the roles, as Berthon said, have lost their meaning. So who is an expert?
I just always have a problem with that. Like when the president of Harvard was being grilled by those Congress people, and one of them spoke so dismissively to her. And so Gore rose up at me. I'm like, that's the president of Harvard you're talking to. And then I had to remind myself, being the president of Harvard doesn't mean what it used to mean.
Mm.
That's when you get into this, I want to go to Utah and learn how to grow a carrot situation.
But if the West is ending...
Over.
If the West is over, why choose parenthood at all? I mean, there is an argument to say like, well, if it's over, let's not bring more people into this situation. I mean, do you still think that it's
I'm not saying we can't fight back, but I'm also saying the whole notion of, well, I have children. This is how diseased everything's got. Like, why should we have? Because we are human beings. And because the best thing about us is that we have and we raise and we love children. And this campaign against women wanting to have children, they don't understand that you don't love the child in spite of all the caretaking. You love him because of all the caretaking. And all those nights you're not at the club and you're not doing all the things, that you're with that child and you're sitting up with that child and you're helping that child and you're cooking a breakfast for that child. And all those things are, a drag. But by doing that for the child, your own child, the love, it becomes intense. Intense. It's the highest kind of love there is. And when you have that kind of love, then you start looking around and thinking, something's not right here. I need to do something. I'm going to go out into this place called Utah. It looks very pretty. I'm going to go out to this place called Utah. I'm going to read the Bible to him. I'm going to show him how to grow his own food. I'm going to show him how to milk a cow. And let's see how he does. It's very, very, very moving to me. And the whole idea, why have a child? I can't even compute that idea. I just can't. Now, I love children. I loved all I ever wanted to do. My sister used to say, Kay, you're going to be married with a baby by the time you're 21. And I would be like, I hope so. That's all I ever wanted, was to be a mom. Really, to be a wife and a mother, to have a household. But something's really off track when sex is so screwed up that young women, that repetition of memes from pornography, like a couple that's totally in love, like she's got to get throttled to get oral sex. Something's wrong.
Somehow every time we talk to you, we get back to the choking.
Really, that's wrong. Back to the next episode. And what about like when people talk about the binge drinking for the hooking up, I'm like, to get the courage to do it or whatever. And I'm like, well, you want to have an extreme sexual experience of vulnerability. What if you weren't drunk? And what if you were sober? And what if you had a profound affection for that person? And what if your fantasies, sexual fantasies, were things that came out of the nature of this moment of sexuality with someone that you really care about, and not following a script that some pornographer came up with? What if that was how? That I'm not saying, must do it this way, or this is a better way, but I am saying that
we're not going to issue a list of approved positions at the end of the episode.
We're not, no, absolutely not. And I don't believe in that. And if somebody's thing is, and kinks are kinks. It's just, there's not that many people who have the kink of choking. That's not right. That just, the distribution of kinks is not that most people want to be choked. That's not it.
And I'm willing to bet money that the disappointment that people experience from trying out the kinks is commensurate with how much they don't care about the person that they have sex with. I'm sure that the people who do find value in it are people who were able to discover some intimacy with the person who shared or was willing to experiment with them. But the strength was doubled down through the other person, not through the act. Itself.
Not the direction I thought we'd be going in, but I'll confess.
Thank you for listening to Uncertain Things. And if you want to hear Vanessa's confession, we got a clickbait, go to uncertain.substack.com and become a member. Or if you just want to support us, give us a 5 stars review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. And, follow us and check us out. Share us with your friends and enemies. And until next time, stay sane.
Okay, I actually have a question for you, Adam. Like hearing Caitlin talk about her decision to wear the Star of David, and she was kind of like, "Oh, I'm worried it was showing performative," but in the end, she felt like she had to. I'm just curious if, like, what is that? How does that make you feel, basically, seeing someone Catholic put on the Star of David in a show of solidarity?
It's funny that you're asking me, because I really wanted to tell this to Caitlin. So thank you for the opportunity, Vanessa.
Sure.
Until October 7th, I should say, until October 8th, I actually always considered the Star of David to be a little silly. There were two people in my immediate life that would normally wear it. My mom was one, and for her, I think she can explain why she was doing it as well as I can explain why I keep kosher, which is to say she couldn't. She likes it. She likes this. She likes it aesthetically, but it's
aesthetics.
Aesthetics, exactly. And my other friend is Batya, who obviously is sending a very clear message with her ginormous Star of David. I've started calling it, ironically, you're here boasting your swastika, your little hate symbol. So every time that I see her polishing it, or I see it extra shiny, whenever she does a Fox News hit or something, I say, your swastika looked great. But since October 8th, I found myself wearing one. It's like, I didn't find myself. I went on Amazon like Caitlin and got myself one. Specifically after I heard about the Hanukkah events that in the US, Canada, and England were being canceled because they were viewed as too political. That made something snap in me, and I said, I need to find the best fuck you that I can. So I ordered my own swas. And the reason I jokingly call it a swastika is because part of the derangement and words don't mean anything anymore game on the far left is to depict any association with Zionism and any symbol of Judaism as A, completely ahistorical, and B, a hate symbol, and C, sometimes literally trying to argue that Star of David equals swastika. And for me, the point was, this is, of course, a violence onto history, but I'm not going to have an argument with people who are so dishonest, but I am going to not let them cow me. So I am going to wear this. And if you want to see this as a hate symbol, see it as a hate symbol. This is, for as far as you're concerned, neo-Nazis on the left, this is a hate symbol. This is me hating you as much as it is me asserting my commitment to the tradition that I come from. But to your specific question, I used to see the people who wear the Star of David as meaning many different things. Back in Jerusalem, for the most part, if you wore it, it would imply a certain class, a certain almost social, economic, and political position, usually on the far right, but not necessarily. But it would have a lot of specific associations that have nothing to do with the current context. After October 8th, I don't think I saw many people, except for Jews like myself, who were often even inclined to wear the black swastika, would wear the black Star of David because of its assertive statement. But the only non-Jew that I saw wearing the Star of David was Caitlin. And I noticed it on Bill Maher, and then on a few other appearances, and then when we had her on for The Remnant with Jonah. And I really like this. It touched me more than I expected. Probably because I kept being disappointed how the only people who seemed to be making a clear stand in defense of Jews, in defense of Israel, were Jews, and not necessarily even them. To see somebody who is clearly not of the tribe and has never made a particular case about Judaism, is not a secret Judeophile, but has just felt the absurdity so clearly that she felt that I am going to make that part of my projected statement, that I was like, this works. If everybody were suddenly forced to do that, if there was a cultural movement like the Black Squares after George Floyd, and people who weren't doing that were being ostracized, I'd be disgusted by that, right? If this was done as a kind of cultural compulsion or compelled to by social pressure. This is the opposite. This is somebody who is stepping out of her immediate milieu to criticize them or to shame them for their beliefs. And as such, I loved it.
Okay. I should have asked you with Caitlin in the room, but I only had so many questions left, so I was like,
no. I'm glad that we didn't. I got it because we exhausted her.
Yeah.
But I said it would have been a shame if we got stuck on me monologuing instead of you talking about sexual trauma, which was awesome tangent.
Okay, hope you enjoyed part 1 of our conversation with Caitlin Flanagan. If you want to keep listening and hear us continue talking about sex, trauma, parenthood, all that good juicy stuff, then subscribe at uncertain.substack.com and check it out. All right, y'all. Stay sane.